Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm Mike King with Intelligent Controls. I am here today with Sam Buffington from Pylontech and my fearless leader, Aaron Hanson, also from Intelligent Controls. We're going to introduce ourselves and then talk about what we're going to be talking about today. So I've been with Intelligent Controls for 2 years now. I do technical design, sales, and support, and I've really just been drinking from the water hose, the fire hose, really. Trying to get up to speed on all these topics. There's a lot to learn, and I'm really excited to be here today with these guys who have a lot more experience than me to ask some questions and really learn something. Sam, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Will do, Mike. My name is Sam Buffington. I'm the Business Development Manager for Pylon Technologies. Current role here, I support all of North America, so United States, Canada, a little bit of LATAM as well in conjunction with the rest of that team down there. Been with the company about 6 months. Pylon has a long history, and I'm not too bad myself. So I got into the industry about 8 years ago, working at Missouri Wind and Solar. Started off there in sales, grew to sales manager, and then director of research and development towards the tail end. From there, got scooped up by Trina Solar and worked in their C&I and utility tracker team for about 1.5 years before I joined Pylon, which kind of my passion is energy storage since I've lived off grid for the entire time that I've worked in this space. So I practice what I preach with that and have a lot of firsthand experience with things that go wrong at 2 o'clock in the morning. So happy to kind of delve into some of that today, as well as the nature of the lithium market. And Aaron, thank you so much for having me up here in Montana to do this today.
Yeah, no, it's great. My name is Aaron Hanson. We started Intelligent Controls specifically, kind of as a response to what we saw in the market. We've been in the off-grid world for 20 years in different ways. And yeah, we're just really excited to have you here. I think we've got a really cool agenda. I'm really excited specifically about just talking about some of the details associated with lithium.
Yeah, I guess part of my journey in the last few years has really been trying to demystify things, break things down to their fundamental level, and then build up from there. So what I would like to do today is cover, in broad strokes, but getting more specific on some topics, the global lithium market, batteries, LFP batteries specifically, and how that impacts the American consumer, whether that's residential users or commercial, industrial, even utility scale stuff. And so if you could tell me a little bit about China and the lithium market, because it seems that all of these batteries are, to some degree, Chinese.
You're absolutely right about that one, Mike. They are all ultimately Chinese. So high-level overview, Pylon and the lithium battery space, and then we'll dive into the details. Pylon Technologies, founded in 2009, one of the original manufacturers of lithium and pioneers in the space of LFP batteries. Foundation from ZTE Industries and telecommunications, which is where they kind of got their start. Really, their big thing is the pioneering of a BMS that was drop dead reliable. That is the number one thing. That's why Pylon BMS protocol is the standard that everyone else bases themselves off of and tries to compete with. Just got back from China a couple weeks ago, so that was a really interesting and cool trip to see firsthand the manufacturing process, the amount of manual work that can go into some of the residential batteries, and the people that are still employed doing it. Looking at it from a high level, right, the reason that lithium battery manufacturing is primarily Chinese has a lot to do with Chinese law. The laws regarding the export of manufacturing capacity for anode and cathode material require that it be manufactured there. That's why you're not seeing very many LFP plants come into the United States, because they can't produce the necessary material to do it. Assembly integration, as they would call it, especially at the utility scale, integration is very common to get domestic content requirements that you'll see for the ITC and tax credits. So I can delve into that a little more when we're ready on that. But
you see so many brands in the U.S. Like, I think that's kind of where my brain is at, is you've got so many brands. Like, and it's interesting how they kind of go in waves, and you see these guys for a while, and then these guys for a while. Sometimes that depends on who their distribution is. Like, somebody will pick them up for a little while, and then they're looking for the next hot one, and they'll pick up those guys. And so there's this rotation, kind of churning of battery like brands. Behind the brands are manufacturers, because a lot of times they're just a sticker. And then, I think it's interesting to see that happen. Is that I've asked in the past, like in other countries where there's a more established lithium market, like the way those brands kind of I mean, it has to be some kind of combining and reduction, in the number of those. Crazy.
So at a high level with the lithium market, you have, we'll call it 4 big players, Pylon being one of those, the smaller of the group, right? You've got others, CATL, CALB, those guys. If we have to edit those out from videoing purposes, we can, but I don't think they're going to care about the pitch, right? Everyone in the market knows this, right? Like I've had dinner with those guys at random events, and it's all one big industry, and everyone plays well with each other and knows their strengths and weaknesses. So what you'll see is you'll have other brands that are distributing batteries in the United States, and they may do some level of integration locally in China or here in the US. Typically, your 4 or 5 cell manufacturers are selling the cells to these other OEMs that are then doing the rest of the work. Maybe they're buying BMSs, maybe they're making BMSs. And that's part of the reason that you see this ebb and flow in brands. And some show up, they're here for a year or two, and then they're gone.
Or you see 5 different batteries that all look exactly the same with different names.
With different names, because they've got one integrator that's then white labeling. And that's something that Pylon is unique in, and that we're fully vertically integrated. That was one of the things that attracted me to them beyond the reliability factor that I had experienced in my time prior to working for them, was that reliability. But that vertical integration is important because it allows for better quality control. And that as we dive into what can cause failure in batteries, maybe in a later part of this interview or another interview that we'll be doing, the mode of failure a lot of times has to do with the quality control of assembly. And that's the big thing that you get into with why these brands are here one day and gone the next, is that they don't have the necessary understanding of the equipment. Part of that is because they weren't pioneers in the industry. They didn't have the scale of R&D force that Pylon has, right? We're 40% research and development of our team there. It's a massive investment. It's an engineering company that sells stuff, right? Yeah. That's a good way to look at it. It's not a sales company that buys components. We're engineers first.
So basically the challenge to starting a lithium battery company is not very high. The challenge of putting a sticker on something it's not a very high bar. There's not a lot of cost involved in that, but the challenge of doing it really right is pretty darn high.
Doing it right and having that quality control and being around to honor warranties years later, that's the tricky part. And that's something that Pylon has been around long enough to do.
Kind of preparing for this, I was thinking about just the customer path, in a lot of cases. And like so many of my customers have tried, I don't know, like 10 different lithium battery company brands, like they've done everything. One of those, one of these. And so it's just it's hard for people to believe that anything's any different, when they've tried so many different ones. And then a lot of times they're not living with it. Mm-hmm. They sold it to somebody. And so the thing is out there doing its thing. Maybe it's kind of half baked. Maybe it's doing good. They don't know. And they've moved on to the next install. So
things are clearly different. There's a reason why a lot of those customers do end up with Pylontech, and why we've ended up with Pylontech, being kind of higher up on the chain there, where we have to support the systems that we sell and the installers that sell our stuff and whatnot. And I mean, really ending up with Pylontech is the thing that's the least pain in our butt.
Yeah, and it's resources. Yeah.
It wouldn't be bad, I think, to kind of explain how we got into Pylontech. Initially we started with Victron, and we were selling a lot of Victron, and Victron had lithiums, and we were doing lead acid batteries. And, I think lithium we're probably one of the latest companies to really get into lithium because they were expensive. I don't know that very many of the original generation of lithium batteries they got sold are still out there. Like they had a pretty high failure rate relative to what, the promise was. And the price was, significantly higher than it is today.
$1,200 a kilowatt hour in 2017.
Yeah.
I was in that same boat. I was in the middle of sales after Hurricane Maria to Puerto Rico, and that was some of the first lithium batteries sold in the U.S. was down there.
A lot of your stuff didn't even have lithium settings. They didn't know, and there definitely wasn't a closed loop, communication option.
Open loop for sure.
So we were pretty slow in getting into it, and then we were doing Victron, and we were, essentially I would look at these pictures of systems in Europe. Then I would like zoom in on them and be like, I wonder what that is. I'm looking at breakers. I'm looking at how they wired stuff. I want to know, what are they doing in places where, the market is more established and where expectations are higher. And I just saw Pylontech pretty much in every picture.
Yeah.
So that drove me to trying to track it down, and we ended up, moving that way. And I just am so thankful that we did, because we have so many installations out there that are just cruising. You know, it's crazy how much we have out there, and it really allows you to sleep at night.
Yeah, that was, same thing at Missouri Wind. Sales and tech support were the same guys, right? It was me and my guys and my team. And if I have to troubleshoot it, I can't be selling more stuff and helping other customers build systems. So, reliability of lithium batteries and of batteries in general is a key component, not only just because of that sales process, but because I know what it's like to have your wife wonder if she can run the microwave if there's enough electricity in the battery bank. And that conversation, like the first 6 months of living off grid, that was a question almost every night is, how can I make my popcorn? Yeah. I mean, it seems silly, but it's those little things that make a difference.
It was such a weird, it's almost like part of your standard process for troubleshooting stuff just went away, because all of a sudden it used to be, we'd spend, somebody calls on the phone and you're talking about their system, and you spend a whole bunch of time trying to figure out what their settings were. And basically it was all about batteries and battery charging parameters, and did they put water in their batteries, and did the da-da-da-da-da. And now we don't have any of those conversations, and it's almost, it's not fair. It's not fair for people like Mike.
Yeah. I pull up VRM and I go to the details tab and I look at stuff. Yeah. And I know right off the bat.
Yeah, I mean, that was always part.
Yeah. We had one the other day, yesterday, that was it was a big system, and they had a breaker that couldn't handle it. Couldn't handle the current. This is in Atlanta, and we're looking at the battery, and we're looking at the inverter, and we're saying, I think something's getting hot in between there. There's definitely a problem with your system, but it's not the batteries, and it's not the inverter. And it's pretty amazing what you can do, from a technical troubleshooting side.
So if you'll let me circle back around, kind of restate stuff, and then correct me if I'm wrong, just to kind of summarize here. So China and batteries. Yeah. They've got a good handle on the supply chain. They've got the expertise as it developed through their manufacturing capabilities and doing the thing that is understandably. That's a big deal for them, and that is a close kept state asset, just that knowledge base. And so you're going to be purchasing from Chinese companies. Then there is, there is anywhere in the world, there's varying degrees of quality control that's going to be held in the manufacturing process. Battery is really composed of two components, the cells and then the BMS, the controls for that. And then once we get past that point, then we move into then how it's sold and how it's marketed and what the sales channels are like. And the end result that we've experienced is whatever combination Pylontech has going on is working as far as the batteries go. It's a high quality product, and that seems to be due to that vertical integration and the fact that you guys actually do have an R&D department, and you are constantly innovating and testing your stuff. And it's not just slapping a label on some cells and a BMS that you're buying from separate parties and putting in a box and then shipping over here and then spending all of your money on U.S. marketing.
Yeah, it's all made under one roof for the most part. You get to the C&I level stuff, which I know we want to talk about, so we'll cover it a little bit. C&I, typically you're seeing manufacturing of components in one area, assembly in another. C&I and utility scale, though, are all tested fully to their spec sheet, which is not something everybody does. And I know we'll delve more into quality control, but every single C&I and utility scale battery are tested to their specifications before they leave and are shipped to the end user.
What we called that, our previous job years ago, was like a burn-in.
Basically, yeah.
So, the idea would be that if you have a piece of electronics, it's going to fail, and it's going to fail right away. Yep. Typically. And so the idea is you cycle it, you heat cycle it to give it, essentially a couple years of actual heating and cooling, and that'll make it fail. If it doesn't fail in that first window, it's not going to fail. Yep. It's like super duper, reliable, and that burn-in cycling is awesome. And so, that's another level that you need. If you want reliable electronics, that it takes you, what do you think the failure rate is on?
It's about half of any competitor, right? So most competitors, in my experience, and if somebody wants to come after me with some other bit of information, this is my own firsthand experience before I ever worked at Pylon. So this is Sam's opinion, having been a salesman and tech support guy for over 6 years, doing it every day. About 1% of the average lithium battery will come out of balance within the first 2 to 3 years of its service life. That doesn't necessarily mean it's all warranty, right? It's not always a warranty. It can be user error. There are things that can be done wrong. But for the most part, that's the number. So you're below 1%, roughly a quarter to 0.5% in my experience from what I've seen with Pylon before I came to work here. Official number may vary. Our marketing team may edit this completely out. That's what I've seen. Okay.
I think you're doing a good job.
That's the reality of the situation.
And as you scale up beyond just one or two battery systems, that failure rate, it becomes super important.
Yes.
And that's
and so we do some work. I can't say who we white label for, but we white label for some relatively large companies here in the United States that have some residential product. Most of those warranties happen in our Dallas facility. This recording studio is not that big. I could fit all of them in here and walk around them over a 5-year period. If that brings in some perspective, I mean, it would fit in a space that's less than 20 by 30. Yeah. So to get an idea of the failure rate, it's extremely low, and usually it's something that can be addressed with like a BMS swap in the field. Right. I mean, you're going to have anything made by man will fail, but typically it's a component that can be replaced. It's not usually a cell imbalance issue. If it is, it's because it's been abused and then left to sit. It's something. It's a similar situation to. Before I worked in sales and solar, I was a machinist and a mechanic for several years in the coal mining industry. So bearings and hydraulics are where I make my way to kind of like bridge that gap and explain things in a personable manner. So if you don't do preventive maintenance on a system and you abuse something and then you just let it sit there and rust, it's going to fall apart.
What if you squirt it with a sprinkler?
Yeah, you start opening up the battery and spraying her down, you're going to have some trouble there.
Strike it with lightning.
Yeah, lightning. And that's something that I want to talk with you guys about, whether that's in this video or some other time, is lightning protection from the perspective of your systems up here and what I've dealt with in the Midwest. Because it seems like it's not an issue here in Missouri or in Montana, and it is in Missouri. Like, lightning's a problem. And if you don't do a system right and you don't ground it properly, you have made a lightning rod out of your solar panels. Like that's a whole thing.
We get a few lightning strikes here and there. But
we have trees.
We're not on the plains. Well, down where you're in the hollers. Yeah. But we don't get those big Missouri storms. Yeah. Really. Yeah. Get a lot of snow,
but still worth like being aware of. I think I was looking at something in Europe the other day, and they had a bunch of lightning protection on their batteries. Yeah. Specifically, and just how to layer that up and how to justify it.
Yeah, and maybe that's better for FAQs or something down the road, because I know we keep going down these rabbit holes.
Yeah, we'll chat about that. I'm gonna crack the whip and get us back on schedule here. So I think this is a good segue now, as we're talking about the reliability and the warranty process, to talk about the importance of buying from a company that's going to be around to continue to support that product.
Yeah. So
to Aaron's point, we've seen a lot of battery brands come through, and we don't see those same ones around. And what happens to their customers? And then what happens to guys like us that are selling them when they go out of business and start seeing failures?
Yeah, so here's the pitch for the whole video, right? This is your sales pitch for those of you listening at home, and you're like, okay, what's this jerk going to talk about that he's trying to sell me on? Pylontech's warranty is relatively unique in that it's not a prorated warranty; it's just a replacement or repair. That's the thing. Like that, if you want to know one thing from a customer service perspective to take away from this whole spiel of us sitting here BSing, that's it: replacement or repair. It's not prorated. Basically, no one else in the industry is doing that.
Yeah. And then what about longevity?
How
long you guys been around for?
2009. So where are we at now? 2025? It's a hot minute.
I don't do math on camera.
Yeah, I don't either. That's not good. Not good for business. Good way to make us look stupid. Right.
No, I think the issue with warranties is just worth talking about in general, because I think people look at that on the data sheet and try to figure out what's the warranty comparison between those different products, and it's such a American thing. I think in Europe and a lot of places they say warranty. Like, we don't want warranty, Like, that's a bad word, In the US it's a quality.
Yeah, I mean we're all stuck in this world of Sears and Roebuck and being able to take a crescent wrench your dad bought and bring it in there and replace it, or the Snap-on truck shows up on Tuesday at your workshop. It doesn't matter if I cut the end off my tape measure, he's probably going to replace it, right? It doesn't. So that's where warranty is really important in the American market, which kind of leads into a topic I think we've grazed over, which is domestication of the actual workforce in the U.S. and the sales team. But staying on this topic of warranty and longevity, just because a lithium battery is out of warranty doesn't mean that it's not still usable, right? We have this aging process of oxidation, which occurs in any battery. I don't care if it's lead acid, like Aaron and I cut our teeth on, or if it's lithium. It's easy, like Mike is able to just sit there and look on a computer and sip a beer while he does it, right?
New generation.
It's not out of service just because it's out of warranty. You're typically going to see, if you operate within the parameters that the battery manufacturers are going to list, and this is Pylon has their list, others have their own, typically 70 to 80% service life remaining at the end of the warranty period is a standard expectation. Right? Now, how warranty works and mixing and matching batteries, which is something I want to touch on just because it's important. Typically, your warranty on a battery system is going to fall to the oldest battery in that bank. Sure. You were asking about what happens when a company disappears, or maybe you just make an upgrade. I know, for example, one of the big ones in this space when I started, I won't list their name so we don't get hit with any sort of problems with copyright, but they do some work for the DoD. Their warranty was prorated, but then also at that time it was whatever the oldest battery in the bank is, that's what it is. Right. So
and you had to prove how many cycles it had or something. I mean, there's a lot of gray area when people say, I want a warranty on this, and it's like, well, like, how do you even start the process?
Yeah, you had to register the serial number to start that process.
But also, like, I mean, if the warranty is based on cycles, like, good luck with a battery that doesn't communicate, figuring out how many cycles it has. It was just like, I mean, really, you have to ask, well, how am I actually going to process this warranty? What's the method that who am I going to call? Oh, they're out of business. Oh, I have no idea. Like, because essentially from the battery perspective, and the lead acid side, we don't need warranties. Like, that's insane. Like, no, like, you broke it, and I think from the battery side, like, nobody really wants to do a warranty. The companies that probably do the best on warranties are the really low quality companies when they were getting started, especially, and they would just ship you a new one, just to kind of shut you up, That was kind of a crazy.
That was a crazy window. It didn't last very long because they realized that was a bad business model when you've got batteries with no communication and people that'll overrun the BMS.
Right. We'll just ship you 2 new ones and maybe you won't give us a bad review. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or then you never hear from them again because they're tired of dealing with you. That happened a lot too.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the domestication of some of the channels, because that's important.
What do you mean by domestication?
So I want to call somebody that's on my time zone. If I have an issue.
Yeah. So that is something.
Domestication.
That is something that truthfully, the yap. What is that thing? That's a
wild dog.
But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it takes a day, right? It takes a day to get an answer from China or a day to get an answer from Europe. Nobody wants to wait a day. It's an emergency now. It's a Friday evening. It's a
Yeah, so that's something, obviously you guys were one of the first, really the first bringing Pylon into the U.S. And now we've got a beachhead in Dallas. We've got about 10 people here that work domestically, myself and BD. Just because this is a long-term video, I won't list everyone else's name because who knows where they're at in 5 years, right? Yeah. But we've got 2 local tech support guys that are available. They're in central time zone, can work outside of those hours if need be, if you've got something that we can schedule ahead. Everybody's got a family at home. But we try to take care of our customers as best we can because of that. We have local.
I will say shout out to Ehab.
Yeah.
I called him from an airport lounge. Or he took my call from an airport lounge and then got me an answer and then checked back in once he got off his flight a couple hours later.
Yep.
He was on vacation.
The guys are good for that. They really are.
Yeah, and like realistically, I mean, if the systems are set up right, I mean, I don't know. Like, I'm trying to think of issues that we've actually had that have been like legitimate issues that it's very
catastrophic.
Very few. Guys plugging wires in the wrong places.
In my experience, that was always the DIY guys. Right. Yeah. It's always where I don't need you to have someone come help me install it. I'm smart enough to do it. And then turns out maybe they were or were not, but they missed something, right? We're all human. We can miss things. Yeah. And so that's one of those things that would happen is you would get people by accident hooking a battery terminal in the wrong way. Maybe they accidentally wire it in series and they shouldn't, right? And that lets some blue smoke out, and that's hard to put back.
Yeah. Ultimately, my big thing is just I don't want issues. Yeah. So I'm happy to have like the highest quality company ever. I want like a really good warranty, but I don't ever want to use it. Yeah. I don't want problems. I don't want issues. I want to be able to scale my business without looking over my shoulder, thinking, oh, those other batteries are all going to fail at some point, and I better think about my place in Mexico, go hide. So I think it really is just about. I mean, we talked about scaling the battery bank, but it's also about scaling your business and having a lot of these batteries out there, and then being responsible for those, and having a company that's going to have your back, as things kind of age out or whatever, because it's such a long time frame. I think that's probably the biggest problem with lithium is, people think they've hit the pot of gold, when they go from lead acid to lithium. It doesn't matter what kind of lithium, it's all good, but then they don't, who's around for the next 5 years.
Yeah, having a good
years.
Partner is really the key. Having a company that's been in the industry long enough to have that reputation and that history, that's important. Pylon considers themselves a premium brand, right? We're never going to be the cheapest lithium battery guy in the market. It's just not the case. But with that, you're getting that premium product and premium service as best as I can give it to these guys. I try to answer the phone anytime that they need me.
So on this topic, I think this is another good segue, talking about partnership, R&D, and honestly, that part about DIY users and things that can go wrong on the installation level. One thing that I'm reaping the benefits of, and Aaron talks about, and I've never known it any other way, is the integration between Victron and Pylontech.
Yes.
Which has been, from talking to people, it's been a long road, and there's been a lot of movement in that area. The engineering departments talk to each other, and the result of that is really a plug and play experience for us, where there's not really. I don't dread the DIY user when I'm putting a system together. As far as I see it, if it's a Victron and a Pylontech system, and I can put together a wire diagram, and I can be involved in the process of sizing out the lugs and the fuses and all that other stuff that tends to be the things that go wrong more often, then if they can put everything together and I can hop on to the remote console and put in some settings, it really just works. And there's nothing that can go wrong. We don't have to deal with dip switches.
Yeah, how many times have we, you find somebody else that's bought something else, and they, you're like, well, they told me I had to isolate them all, get them all charged up individually so they're balanced, and they told me that, I had to do this, and they told me, it's like the manual for getting the thing commissioned is like 5 pages long and all kind of confusing.
Yeah.
And I think I'm going to ask you to deep dive into this on probably the next video where we really go into some of the more nerdy details and scaling on batteries. Yeah. But it's a simple product to like implement with, especially with Victron. I mean, it's like this super smooth.
And Victron is I believe it's our largest partner in Europe, right? That's Pylon's big pairing is Victron. So that, you're there looking at pictures several years ago of, okay, what's this? Where's everything at? What brand is that battery? You already were kind of established with Victron and you wanted a reliable battery partner, and that's because that is the partnership globally, right? I mean, that's a big deal for us in Europe.
And you see it in like, our updates from the Netherlands, where they're talking about as a new firmware update. I mean, probably once a quarter, there's something that specifically is a Pylontech specific tweak. Mm-hmm. And then I think it's also really interesting, I remember this was years ago, but I remember one of the things with Pylontech was, they've got a BMS, and then you can sort of tell if a company is active by like what version of firmware they're on. Yeah. And so the fact that Pylontech is constantly also iterating and updating firmware, I remember there was an issue maybe 5 years ago, where like a temperature probe sometime in the Pylontech BMS could get like a weird out of bounds reading. And there was a firmware update to resolve that. And that was the only thing I can think of that was like kind of in your face. And I never saw it really, but just that constant ability to kind of keep up with, and that firmware revision number is really something to look at, because a lot of these companies, they make something, they ship it, and then like if you want to like update it, you really can't, and they're just sort of a one and done product line.
Yeah, and it's one of the unique things that I've found with Pylon as well, coming in with my own biases, right, is that a lot of times their BMSs, all their firmwares are really heavily tested to communicate with each other, and that's important. This is actually another good time to spring us another surprise on you guys. Sometime this year, you're going to see a Bluetooth adapter module for the US series of batteries that'll allow you to access that without having to plug into it directly. And when you're done with it, you can unplug it.
For remote console stuff?
For remote console stuff. It'll be Bluetooth initially, but you'll see some other things soon. So there's another little surprise for you guys that's coming down the pike to make your life easier.
Yeah.
And one app for everything also. So that'll be coming out very soon.
Okay, so is that any chance that's gonna be on the phone as well as the laptop?
It is a mobile application to make it easy. Okay. That's right.
I'll be able to get into the cell details.
That's right.
Decode any
You'll have all of that
errors beyond just what gets communicated to Victron.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
yep.
I like
It'll
that.
all be available.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. So crack the whip. Come on.
Awesome. All right. So let's talk a little bit more about that pairing between the BMS and the cells, and kind of that difference between a manufacturer that's making their own stuff and testing it together versus just assembling somebody else's cells and somebody else's BMS.
Yeah, I mean, I want a visual for that, and the visual for me is similar to what you see with like the solar panel manufacturers, where they're sorting the cells, and they might have 5 different solar panels or 4 different solar panels, all the same size, but with different cells and different outputs, and they've done a job of sorting those for performance.
So to delve into that, right, I saw this firsthand while I was in Shanghai. So what you're seeing with that at the cell level is the manufacturing is extremely high quality control. There's twice as many engineers as you could technically get away with, right? Like, so they're engineering and resource heavy. There's twice as many people there as you maybe could.
Engineers matter.
They matter. And so what you've got is there's a high level of sorting and capacity testing and a lot of things that are, if it's outside of the specs, it's rejected and it's done away with, right?
No, to the other guys.
No, we don't do any grade B cells. You want to talk to some of those other guys about some grade Bs? Okay, that's on you, but you'll be feeling that in about 600 cycles. But no, everything is charged, tested, sorted. It was unreal to me to see the just racks of batteries going through testing at the cell level in what I'm going to call milk crates, right? The way they were sorting these individual batteries, having them all in racks down to the third decimal point of testing was impressive to see. Like that showed me as not just an employee, but as someone who's a nerd on this stuff, that they are really doing what they say they're doing, right? Because you're not going to fake that level of testing from anybody. It's what happens, and they sort them.
It's super hard to appreciate that. I mean, from a data sheet, consumer level, I'm looking on the internet, I'm looking at prices. I want to buy a battery, it has the same specs as the other battery. Like, you don't see that. And so that's super fun to see that. And ultimately, Pylontech's probably doing that for selfish reasons because they want really high quality stuff and they don't want issues.
Yes, that's the exact reason.
From a marketing standpoint, which is kind of our side because we want to sell these things, it's really important to be able to explain that.
Yeah. And so that's where, we get into this idea of BMS and integration. And my own personal experience with it is that, and I'll oversimplify this by saying these batteries are made Monday and these batteries are made Wednesday, right? Anyone who's worked production knows there's a difference in the quality of what comes off the assembly line on those varying days. But even with robotics and automated control, there's a limit to human capacity to make things identical, right? This is my background as a machinist coming out measuring to the 10,000th of an inch, right? But over time, those little bitty errors, this little difference that's maybe imperceivable to the human eye, electrolyte imbalances, the thickness, right? There's always variance in this. That problem exacerbates itself 3 to 5 years down the road in these batteries. And that's why you see some of these problems with balance with these other brands and why they disappear. They're buying cells in bulk from a major manufacturer. Maybe the cells are fine, right? They're good quality cells, but the balancing that occurs during that assembly process and the fact that they're just taking, okay, this is a whole batch that we bought. It's a whole container load. It came into us and it's got batteries made on different days, or those little assembly changes long-term make a difference to the quality of the battery and its ability to last beyond its warranty period, especially.
Well, yeah. And I mean, it really is like an issue of who's the company that's selling the stuff? Because if I got a container of batteries and I knew that I could sell that and I wouldn't have any trouble selling it, and it just kind of goes off into the ether. That's that. I don't know. Why do I care about quality at that point? I just want to move. Like, give me another container, and I'll sell that to the giant void, that's out there. And I think it's really hard for consumers to they're not going to go back and figure out the path and stick it to anybody. Like, you're kind of done. At that point, the real loser in that whole scenario is the consumer, and then the next layer is the installer, and the next layer is the distributor, and then those guys are all going to be.
And there's a term that if you're in the industry long enough, Mike, I don't know if you've heard me use this or you've heard it, but we call it the solar coaster, right? That's really what it is. And there's this big ebb and flow, and a lot of that has to do with problems that crop up. You build these partnerships with a company, and then 5 years later you find out, maybe it was a great product, and then a little capacitor changed somewhere, and now you've got 100,000 units of a component that's an issue. And that's where, to circle back to the pitch of vertical integration, because we have total control over complete manufacturing down to making the boxes and cabinets and BMSs in-house, that level of control can really prevent all that. And it shows in the fact of Pylon's longevity.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. All right. Well, Sam, Aaron, I think that was a lot of good information, and I think that we should go ahead and cut that video there. I know that we've got more topics we want to talk about that would probably be best in the follow-up video. So thank you very much for all of that, and I will see you all in the next one.